Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts, Whiskey and Sweet Tea, discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Today's topic, the Jim Carrey-led romantic comedy, Yes Man. Please be advised, spoilers are ahead. We're back with, again, Yes Man. First off, I want to say, if you're listening to us on our YouTube audience, please subscribe, hit that notification bell. We still love you guys. You guys are the original audience. But we're also welcoming, any new people who've discovered us on Spotify or other podcast platforms. Welcome, guys.
Welcome, and if I could interject, obviously, especially if you tuned in for our last episode, we keep talking about this movie. If you're confused, the reason is because the audio actually got corrupted and we didn't know until the editing process, so we actually have to re-record this episode. So if you're confused, like, oh, what are they talking about last week's episode? Was Yes
Right.
Man, that's why. So now it's this week's episode. But at least now you know that it's Zooey Deschanel month, and also just figured, what the heck, for fun, just going to throw out there that this actually isn't the first time we've re-recorded an episode. Last time it didn't mess with our schedule, so it wasn't noticeable. But if anyone can guess, either tweet at us, or if you're watching this on YouTube, put it in the comments. If you can guess what episode before this one was re-recorded, we're possibly, I'd be down to do a giveaway. So if anyone can guess, I don't know, maybe like an Amazon gift card or something like that.
Right, and just throwing this out there because this is something that I do. Rules of the competition the competition is it's the first person only.
Yes, no repeats. As soon as we got a winner, we've got a winner.
Right,
and we'll say, again, if you tweet at us, we'll comment or retweet or whatever that you're the winner. If it's a comment, we'll pin the comment so everyone knows. But yeah, just thought that might be a fun thing, and who knows, maybe we'll have a winner, maybe we won't.
Maybe
but anyway, going back into Yes Man this week.
Yes Man, the 2008 Jim Carrey-led comedy. Let me just go through the stats really quick. We directed by Peyton Reed, starring Jim Carrey as Carl, Zooey Deschanel as Allison, Bradley Cooper as Peter, Danny Matheson as Rooney, Rhys Darby, I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly, as Norman, and Terrence Stamp as Terrence Bradley, as I like to call him, the cult leader. It was adapted from Yes Man, a memoir by Danny Wallace. And yeah, so let's just go ahead and get into it. So
the good news is it's been a long enough time that I don't remember every little detail we talked about, but just get me caught up again why you picked this movie for this month, besides it being Zooey Deschanel month, obviously.
Well, Zooey Deschanel month actually came secondary because I know you had picked already for this month 500 Days of Summer.
Yes, and it was a complete coincidence. We had no idea until we both picked. It was like, wait a second, she's the lead in both of these movies.
So well, I picked this one because actually I fielded a couple people. I was trying to understand because I don't know if our listeners know this, but when Whiskey picks a movie, I try not to do any research into it. So I can be, because a lot of times he picks movies that I have never seen or never heard. I've usually heard of them, but never seen or experienced before. So I want, my reaction to be into it as authentic and not be, tainted with any reviews or commentary on it. So
that's generally what I do for your picks too.
Right.
Most of the time, well, I don't know, you've been pretty good about picking stuff I've never seen before, but generally, if you're tuning in for the first time, the rules with us is we do not talk to each other until we record the podcast. Mm-hmm. And I also, if I've never seen the movie, I will not look at anything until I see the movie and talk about it. If I'm doing some research, if I'm curious about, the box office or something, I might look at it. But generally, I try and do the same thing that T does and just go in blind.
Well, to be fair, I do sometimes send you just random horror-themed memes.
That's true.
In between.
And this one I had seen when I was a teenager, so this was refreshing when you recommended it. I was like, oh, I don't think I've seen this since it came out.
Well, and I had never seen this movie before because I had originally was going with, okay, 500 Days of Summer, it says sort of romance to it, but it's more serious. At least, I was thinking in my head because I hadn't seen it. So I started with some other movies, and I was talking with my cousin. And he was like, you should do Yes Man. And I was like, why? He says, because I'd asked him if he'd seen the other one. He was like, oh, they're both takes, different sort of takes on the manic pixie dream girl trope. At least, that was his opinion. So that's kind of how we settled on this one. So unlike most of the time where I've usually seen my movie before. I had never seen this one before, so this was kind of a fresh take for me, and it was kind of different because I think I've talked to you, and I think I've mentioned this to you when I was explaining why I picked it. Was when I first saw like the trailers and everything for this movie, it looked very kind of like a bro comedy, and so that's what I went into it expecting, and I was very actually kind of just I found it very refreshing. There were a few kind of broy moments, but for the most part, it was just very how can I say it's kind of basically almost just a classic romantic comedy.
Well, it's got a very positive because if for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, the premise is that he attends like this self-help conference where like basically the mantra is that you say yes to
Everything.
The idea is that you say yes to more things. He gets into he says no to everything. He lives like a boring life. He just rents movies and stuff. And so out of like curiosity and because people are saying like your life is boring or what, he goes to this conference. He's very like contrarian with the leader of the conference, and so he like scares him by saying like you're entering a covenant with me and you have to say yes to everything.
Right.
If you don't, bad things will happen to you. And so it's very similar. I saw this as a teenager because I was a huge Jim Carrey fan as a youngster from like late elementary school up until then, and he kind of went off and was doing like dramas and stuff. Like he was in one of my favorite movies of all time, Eternal Sunshine. He was in like The Truman Show, which is pretty funny too. But he started off as like a very zany comedy actor, and then he started doing more serious work. Then he kind of had trouble getting back into comedy. He kept picking like bad projects or whatever. And so the thing with this is that the premise is super similar to a movie he did in the late 90s called Liar Liar, where the premise in that one is his son makes a wish that his father would stop lying, and so he literally cannot lie. Like, and he's a lawyer, right? So like, and it's not that bad things will happen to him; it's that he physically cannot lie about anything. And it's great for Jim Carrey because his sort of performance is very like, I hate to say overacting, but it goes back to his background as like before when he was a stand-up comedian before he started doing sketch comedy and stuff. He was he would do impressions. He was like an impressionist. So with that type of comedy, it's almost like a living caricature. You're over-exaggerating people's traits. The way they talk and act. He does like facial expressions and stuff.
Right.
And so that kind of carried into his acting career. At least in comedies, because he's doing a character that's very like, for instance, in Liar Liar, the idea again is that he can't lie. So that's such a weird idea, right? Like imagine something that most people can like do very easily, and he's just struggling to like try and lie, and so his performance is very like over the top. And that's kind of like even if you've only seen him in like The Grinch, that's part of the reason they picked him for that role is because he's very good at contorting his face, and The Grinch is very cartoonishly angry and stuff. So like that's something that's one of his strengths, and it goes back to even when he was like in his early 20s and he was just doing impressions at like open mic nights and stuff. So the thing that they marketed this movie was like, oh, this is like Liar Liar. So I was like, oh, hey, that's a good movie, and this sounds like a funny premise. I'll go check it out. And until we recorded this podcast and stuff, I was under the impression it was the same director as Liar Liar, because that whole period of Jim Carrey's career, he worked with the same comedic director, Tom Sadiak.
Right.
Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he did Ace Ventura, he did Liar Liar. Later on, he did the Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty movies. So
also, just like big, what I'm trying to say, just like big comedy titles. These are all ones that even I've heard of.
Exactly. And so I was under the impression that was the director, but it's not. Yes Man was directed by Peyton Reed. And he is also a pretty, like, it's funny, I didn't know this until we were recording the podcast, but so he did Bring It On, probably the best cheerleading movie. He did all the Ant-Man movies, so he's currently working with Disney and Marvel. He's actually directed a few episodes of The Mandalorian. He did a movie called The Breakup. And most importantly for this movie, he actually directed a few episodes of New Girl. And yeah, so like that's we talked about this last time we recorded, and we talked about this in 500 Days of Summer. This was kind of right before Zooey Deschanel became what she is now. Like this was the year before New Girl premiered, so I think like a lot of these movies she was in kind of led to her acting in that show.
Well, and that's
because
how
she's essentially kind of playing the same character. Like there are plenty of manic pixie dream girls from this era. One of my favorite like indie quote unquote like romance things like Garden State, and that's Natalie Portman is kind of this goofy weird girl and stuff. But I feel like what really cemented it in this like late 2000s era was Zooey Deschanel playing this character a lot in movies. And I'm sure there are some that we can't, like, I'm not even thinking of. I know before this, she was in stuff like The Happening with M. Night Shyamalan stuff.
And Mark Wahlberg, unfortunately.
Yeah, not a good movie.
Yeah, no.
And also doesn't play to her strengths. Because as much as the Manic Pixie Dream Girl is sort of a, like, eye-rolling part of this period of time, it wasn't overdone at the moment, and she just sort of like, I wouldn't say that Zooey Deschanel's playing herself, but she's playing to her strengths. She's very like, her personality is a lot like these characters in real life. I don't think she teaches jogging classes with photography or anything, but she is into like very obscure like music from like vintage eras and stuff like that, and she's a very talented singer. You see that in both of these movies, so it just sort of is natural for her to do this. And I don't, to be fair, I also don't think she probably has to act as hard as she would for a more challenging role, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because like if it's a
role that plays her strength, it's comfortable.
I'm basically if I'm basically playing a version of myself, why not, right? I talked about this last time, but that was something that kind of irked me about this movie is the pairing of the two. I don't think my opinions changed on that really. I do think it's a little weird.
She's like in like her like early 30s, and I think he's like, isn't he like in his like 50s or 60s or something in this movie?
I think she was in her late 20s.
Oh wow, okay. Not that we're judging. We're not judging anybody's relationship. We're just talking about specifically the chemistry wise with the age difference played to that.
No, I do think age difference, because it's more accepted. Like, and that is something I think is a little weird. I don't think like it's inherently bad for there to be like an age gap like that, but in Hollywood, it's normalized to the point where like I think one famous example is the actress who played Tom Hanks's love interest in a movie. The next year, as soon as she turned like 30 or something, she was suddenly Forrest Gump's mom. And it's like, unless you're like in your 20s as an actress, like you're not going to be a love interest. And that has stopped lately. But it's weird. You don't see that really with like older like female actors unless it's played for a laugh. And this it's taken for granted. And again, like, and also like this was around the time, I think I talked about this last time, but like, so around this time, Jim Carrey also had kind of a creepy moment where he like made like a YouTube video directed at Emma Stone talking about how hot she is, and if he was 20 years younger, he would
that's uncomfortable
marry her and stuff. That sticks out in my mind. And obviously Jim Carrey is not in charge of casting. It's just something that it rubs me the wrong way.
Well, and I can understand that. Unfortunately, the way, especially at this time period, casting is that, and I think it even is to an extent still like this today, is that females are considered not essentially leading woman material in specific movies once they pass the age of 30. But
that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, but like men can essentially go on being leading men as long as they look somewhat presentable.
No, exactly. Well, and this was even kind of like people were poking fun at this. I think they did this on purpose because it was funny, but the most recent Aunt May and the Spider-Man movies, is not like, she's very attractive, and I don't even think she's 40 yet. And so the idea that this traditionally like elderly woman is being played by this like attractive younger actress is like, wait, what? I
Yeah.
don't know. Like, and again, I think that that actually is played for laughs, especially in the movies, how Tony Stark is always like flirting with her and stuff. But it's that. But also, again, like, part of it is that Jim Carrey did that at the time, and I always like think back to that.
It was an
I do
uncomfortable moment.
I will say that they have decent chemistry. I don't think
That's
that
true.
like, it doesn't come off as creepy. Like, it's mostly like the real world seeping into my brain more than the movie doing anything.
Yeah, because
You know
I'll
what I
say
mean?
when I was watching, I mean, he's obviously older in the movie, but you know the age difference. You said their chemistry is good enough to where you don't focus on that at all. And like you said, it's probably just the real, like you said, the real world coming into and helping
Again,
that
it has
along.
nothing to do with the movie. It
Yeah.
has to do with what I know about Jim Carrey and what I know about like Hollywood and stuff, and
Well,
it's weird.
Speaking of Jim Carrey and his work in this film, you know, I did look into some of this. He was quite dedicated to this movie. I know you talked about how he was kind of doing, this is kind of his, I believe it's like sort of comeback to comedy films after several years of just dramas. And he picked up this movie because, kind of like you had mentioned with Liar Liar, with just the natural comedy that comes into not being able to lie about things, he was pretty sure, you know, he could, that by just saying yes to things, it would create lots of comedic moments. And there are some genuinely funny moments in there. I don't think, and I do think, I kind. I when I was because I rewatched it again because like you said we are re-recording. I rewatched it again, and it's interesting to me because what I appreciated the first time around is that it didn't become too risque. You know what I mean? Where it could easily have crossed into some problematic territory, especially by today's standards. And
I agree. I think it's pretty tame. The one thing that again, I don't think it would be taken as well today is the bit where he gets like an ad for a mail order bride,
right,
and because he has to say yes, he like, you know, clicks on it, and so for a chunk of the movie, he like has a like Arab mail order bride, like,
right.
who he's
Her name is Farusha, I believe.
There's some payoff to that at the kind of like near climax and stuff, but I don't think people would find that as funny nowadays.
Right.
I definitely was kind of like, yikes. But I don't think it's like overtly super duper offensive or anything.
Right, but I guess what I meant is that the movie could have easily have crossed into just many issues with like consent and, you know, things like that. And and you know, I was the first time around I was very appreciative of that, you know, it did kind of stay clear of that. The second time around, you know, I'm kind of I wish it would have not necessarily become problematic, but if it had come a little bit closer to that line, because it does, I will say it does keep, you know, several yards away from that line of consent and problematic behavior that could arise from this. But I do think there was some missed opportunity for some potential comedy there by riding that line a little more.
My biggest criticism of this movie is that, like, it really just doesn't play to Jim Carrey's strengths.
And
because
that's so
his
odd.
because his acting style is so over the top. Like, this movie, he's not really that zany of a character. And because he isn't like physically unable to say no, like, there's none of that sort of like there's none of that kind of physical acting to it. A lot of this, it's situational comedy, and it's not something he can't do. But again, like, playing to his strengths, it's not what he's best at. And, you know, I said this last time, but it's like there's no reason you needed to cast Jim Carrey in this role. Like, you could have picked anybody. Who's obviously, it would be best with like a comedic actor, but there's not, honestly, it kind of felt almost like it was marketed as his big comeback rather than it being a movie that required him to be in it. You know what I mean? And I don't think he does a bad job. I think the movie doesn't do a good job of giving him an opportunity to do a good job.
Well, and like what you were saying about he didn't need to be in it, and that's exactly true. However, this movie I think only got made because he was in it. I did some more research, and
No, I don't think that.
This
I don't
script
think
was.
that. I think it was cast because he wanted to get back into comedy. I think this movie was written, by itself, and in Hollywood, casting is like much more of a process than who's best for the role. I do think that this was whoever wrote it, had this idea in mind and everything, but I do think it's like, some casting director was like, oh, Jim Carrey's looking to get back into comedy, and this premise sounds a lot like Liar Liar.
So this script was actually on the blacklist in 2007. So I do think one of the reasons why it got picked up off of it is because I guess he'd read it. He really, really liked the script, and that's what allowed it to get this, have it made like by a major studio with an actual budget, is because he was attached to it. Because like I said, this was an adaptation of a memoir by Danny Wallace, and I haven't read the memoir, but apparently it was basically there wasn't like a weird cult thing, I don't think, but he just challenged himself to say yes, and it's kind of just about changes and weird situations that happened to him. Nothing as grandiose as like a mail order bride or anything like is showcased in the movie, but I think it was a script that was picked up, and I think just based on what I've read, and of course I can't confirm any of this, but I do think with Jim Carrey taking an interest in it, I do think they did punch up some of the comedy in it, because I feel like it was meant to be more of especially with it being on the blacklist, I do think it was a movie that may have had a little bit more heart in it originally, but of course I can't speak to that because I haven't read the original script. But that's kind of usually where I fall on when I see something on the blacklist. I usually kind of see it. It usually has something more going for it than a big name attached. But
I agree. For the most part, I've read some really bad blacklist scripts too, so sometimes I'm just like, why is this on it? But and if anyone listening doesn't know what the blacklist is, it's essentially like a list of really quote unquote good movies that no big studio bought. So it's almost kind of like free game if you're like a producer or something. Like if you pay for the script, it's like, oh, this is going to be really good.
Well, not necessarily. I actually found that out. It's actually just the most talked about ones, not necessarily good, but just the ones that are being passed around the most.
Oh, for sure. Well, and again, I kind of came to that conclusion myself anyway, because I had to write some coverage for some blacklist movies, and some of them were awesome, and some of them I was like, honestly, like there's a horror version of the blacklist called the Bloodlist,
mm-hmm.
and I read one from that, and it sucked. It was bad.
Well, I read when I was interning, I read the original script for Wish Upon. And nice. The script was good. I liked the script. I was actually, they let me take it home, and I was like, oh, I'm excited to read it. I liked the script, and then I saw what happened to it, and I was like, oh, okay.
See, that one is a good bad movie. Like, that one is funny. I'm not the only one with this opinion, but that one's like The Room for me. It is incredibly funny, some of the things in it. So even though it is a terrible movie, I actually usually recommend, like, oh, if you haven't seen it, grab some popcorn. It's not scary at all. It is the stupidest thing you'll ever see.
But the script was originally, I'm just saying, the script originally for that had some, depth to it. But going back to Yes Man, whether or not, Jim Carrey was right for it, he did kind of put his all into it. I read some more. He broke ribs doing this movie. I don't know if you remember about the beginning or at the bar.
Yeah, it was the bungee jumping, right?
No, not that one. That I was actually gonna get to that in a second. But he's at a bar, and there's just a slapstick moment where he slips and knocks over a waitress or something, and he fell the wrong way, and he broke 3 ribs. Poor guy.
Yikes.
And then the bungee jump
scene. That's the take they used.
Oh my! I know, right? I hope. Well, if it is, in one take he gets back up and walks off. So he must have been in some serious pain doing that, if that is the take they use. The bungee jump scene was actually pretty interesting because he insisted on doing it himself. But what was interesting is the insurance company would not insure the movie they wouldn't insure the leading man to do this, because then, if it happened while they were shooting, they have to shut down production. So they agreed to let him do it as long as it was the last thing they shot and it was done in one take.
Gotcha.
He and then he learned Korean and guitar for this. So unfortunately, even though the movie didn't fully pay off the way he was expecting it to, I can always admire somebody who puts effort into something that they believe in, even if it doesn't turn out well. That was pretty cool.
No, and that's how he's always been. He's very like, sometimes he even goes kind of method to the point where it annoys people. But he always, like, one thing you can't say about Jim Carrey is he never half-asses anything. He's always like, even if it's like a silly, stupid movie, like he'll always put his all into it. And this goes back to like when he was on in Living Color. One of his characters that he played was like this fire marshal, and like the joke was that the guy's like very accident prone, and so he has like a really deformed face from like all the like horrible accidents he's been in. And a lot of that actually wasn't even prosthetics, it was just Jim Carrey contorting his face. So God. Even just for like a character on a sketch show, like he was making a face for, like, he said they couldn't shoot him for more than like 30 seconds because that's how long he could hold that expression. But there you go, like just a sketch on a comedy show. And even yeah, I mean, like he's always been that way, and he always is that way. Like he puts his all into a role. You're like, even if, and I mentioned this last time, but like so after this movie came out, it didn't exactly revitalize his career because he kind of kept picking a lot of really bad projects afterwards. Not his fault. One of them was Dumb and Dumber 2, which sucked, but I was very excited for that one. And I'm sure, on paper it sounded like a good idea. But one that he was in that was a terrible movie that I actually will put myself out and say he was the best thing about the movie was Burt Wonderstone.
Yes, my mother actually saw that at South by Southwest because she went one year, and she said people were walking out of the theater during that.
It is terrible, but the one thing I thought was legitimately funny in the movie was Jim Carrey was the bad guy, and he was playing, because it's about like magicians, and he was basically doing like a parody of Chris Angel, like Mind Freak, like very edgy comedy, like I'm gonna swallow broken glass and stuff like that. And he was so funny, and he got like really buff for the role too, so he could be like wearing like shirtless, wearing like a leather vest and stuff. And he, like, the sort of magic tricks he did were like super violent and like creepy, and like he just playing it up. The movie sucks. I will not say like it's even worth checking out for his performance, but he was like the one thing in that movie that was okay. I'd almost like look up a compilation of like all the scenes he was in because he is funny.
Well, I mean, especially for at South by South, the amount of weird stuff people are walking out of your shoe at South by Southwest. I can't really speak to any future that film has.
Yeah. Well, no one liked it, and that was like a whole. I mean, that wasn't even a Jim Carrey. Like he was a character in it, but he wasn't like it was a Steve Carell movie, and he's had his share. Like I mentioned, Evan Almighty, that was not a good movie.
It wasn't good, but it was definitely one that when it came on TV, I'd watch it. I actually remember that one better than Bruce Almighty. But there's a couple things I wanted to get to because I actually had some interesting discussion about this that I want to get to, but I wanted to bring a couple of things to the forefront. We have in this movie we have a very young Bradley Cooper, especially if you just saw him in A Star Is Born recently.
Yeah, that's right. And it was before. Oh my God, this was before the first Hangover. That
right, this is like he's like babyface in this one.
Dang.
We have that, crazy. And then this is kind of just something interesting that I noticed. You probably didn't notice this, but I remember around this time there were some commercials for Sears that had just dads. Like not real dads, but people playing dads in them. And I always remember there was this one where they had there was one where there was a ping pong tournament because I guess the idea is that the women were shopping and they were just playing ping pong or something in some part of the store. And there was some guy keeping score in there, and I always remember his face. And I was actually glad to see him in this movie. I'm like, oh cool, he got some legitimate film work. His name is Aaron Takahashi. I guess he's improv.
The male nurse, right?
Yeah, the male nurse guy. Yeah, he I guess he's an improv performer. But that was kind of cool to see. Essentially, what I consider, just me as sort of an icon of TV commercials at this time period show up in this movie. That was kind of cool. And then the other thing I was going to say is her band Munchausen by Proxy.
Oh yeah.
So that the band and the backup singers and everything, everybody except Zoe Deschanel is an actual all female band. I'm not sure if it's still around, but they were based out of San Francisco. They were named Von Iva, and they were chosen essentially because the music supervisor, I guess, was at Amoeba one day and saw their album and I guess liked it, and so they got the gig. But I wanted to kind of shine some spotlight on that on that little that talent that kind of showed up in there. But the main thing I want to talk to you is especially when coming off of talking about Zoe Deschanel's The Manny Pixic Dream Girl, especially in 500 Days of Summer. And when I was rewatching it for this re-recording, something came to me that didn't come to me the first time. So they are essentially each other's manic pixie dream girls in this movie. Do you understand what I mean?
Kind of.
'Cause
The thing is, he is fake though. Like, well, not fake, but like he is forced to be a manic pixie dream boy.
true, but I was just
so it's not like she, and that's the thing. Like, oh, she really likes the person he is. It's not just that he does like wild and crazy things, but the reason she initially likes him is because it almost reminds me of Aladdin, right? He meets Jasmine because, well, he meets her before, but like when they're romantic, it's like, oh, I'm a prince, but he's not a prince. You know what I mean?
right.
So it's like kind of the same thing. So like I only half agree with you. If it wasn't for him being forced to say yes, he wouldn't be.
Well, that's
Mr. Exciting.
Well, that's true. Except she doesn't know that for the majority of the movie. So for the majority of the movie, he is just Mr. Exciting. And that's kind of what I mean by that, because she says a couple times, she says stuff like, oh, he's like no one I ever met before. Oh, he's like, I think she even says, oh, he's so spontaneous. She's talking to other people. So, that's kind of interesting and I actually kind of think that she's less of a manic pixie dream girl than maybe that we saw in 500 Days of Summer. Just because I feel like in this one, she has an actual personality outside of that. She's an actual photographer. She has her own goals, her own ambitions. They may not be big ones, but she actually has them. And like in 500 Days of Summer, that's one of my biggest issues with it, is that the character of Summer, nothing about her at all. She leaves her job. Why? We have no idea. And so I actually kind of thought it was interesting that maybe she is a manic pixie dream girl in this movie, but from her perspective and the way she talks, he's a manic pixie dream guy, until she finds out at the end that it's all fake or whatever. But she was buying into all oh, he just hops on planes, or oh, he often just spontaneously does all night benders with Red Bull and then goes jogging in the park. I really thought that was kind of an interesting sort of gender flip on that, because she even thinks about it at the end. She says, I don't know anything about you. And that's true. She really didn't, except that he was just interesting and did stuff that's different. So I kind of thought
seemed
that
interesting.
Exactly. He seemed interesting. He seemed interesting. That's true. He seemed interesting, but as far as she knew, that's who he was, until the reveal at the airport that he just did this class, or this I call it a cult, because it's basically what it was.
I agree to some extent. I fully agree with the fact that she's a more fleshed out character than she was in 500 Days, and that is by design. Like, the whole point of 500 Days we talked about is that Tom fell in love with the idea of Summer and not the actual person. But I will say, I don't think she's like a full, like, because having like a real like three-dimensional character is understanding someone's motivation, and we never really get into the why. Like, she takes like Polaroids of things, and she's very weird and quirky, but we don't like why are you teaching people photography? Why I don't know. Like, I guess it's because she likes to give back. I think there's a line about like, oh, it's almost like serving the community, like teaching people exercise and stuff. But it's not like we get into like her, past and anything like that. And we don't need to. This isn't a movie where we need a character study on the girl. Like, this is a very like by the numbers Hollywood comedy. But I will say that you're right. She is definitely more of a character than in 500 Days of Summer. But that was also kind of the point of that movie, is that she wasn't supposed to be a fully rounded character, because it's all from Tom's perspective, and he never took the the time to get to know her outside of like his obsessive interest in her quirks. Whereas this one, like, I mean, Jim Carrey's character does. I forgot what his name is, but
Carl.
but like there's more to her than just being quirky, and that's for sure. And there's also a point at which it's too weird for her. Like if she was a real, truly manic pixie dream girl, nothing would bother her.
Right.
And by the end of the movie, that's not true. There's lines that you can't cross with her. And that actually was like one of the funniest bits for me with this movie was all the payoff for all of the crazy things that he's been doing.
Yes.
So like he gets confronted at an airport because a lot of the things he's been doing is very suspicious, especially at the time. This was post 9/11. I mean, it's post 9/11 now, but at the time it was a lot worse. As far as like suspecting people, and like he was learning Korean, he had a mail order bride. He was learning something else. Right?
Oh yeah,
that was kind of sketchy.
He went to flying school.
Flying lessons. That's what it was. Now that there's been like a few more weeks for me to stew on it, I think part of what is so funny is the realization never occurs to the audience until that moment, just how suspicious any of that stuff is.
Right, and you're just like
that's
oh
what's
yeah.
funny is like that once it dawns on you how very red flaggy a lot of that stuff is, you start laughing because you're like, oh my god, like if I were to like go out and do all this exciting stuff, I'd probably be on a list, like
well, it's just like you said, that's one of the things that the movie said has that's its strength is it pays off essentially everything weird that he does, and what's cool is we get to essentially see both sides of the coin. We get to see all the great things that can happen when you say yes. And then we get to see the problems that arise when you just blindly say yes. The good things being like he's able to talk that guy off the ledge through song. He helps his friend's fiance pick out stationery for their wedding because he spoke Korean and he was able to find out.
Well, he was also able to set that Korean girl up with wasn't it the male nurse?
Not the male nurse,
no,
the manager at the bank, Norman.
That's what it was.
And so we get
who was a great character, by the way. That actor I haven't seen in a while, but he's very
he was kind of fun. He was cute. It was fun, but like I said, you get to kind of see what. We get to see the point of what I guess the Terrence is the guy who runs the cult. With the point he makes at the end before he actually makes the point, we get to see by opening yourself up to new experiences, you get to experience more of life. You get to enjoy things. You get to. I already said things never more, but all the pauses that come with it. But then he's like, you can also say no to things that you genuinely don't want to do. The point is just to not automatically shut them down. And so then we can see, well, when we just kind of blindly do everything, something bad could happen, like apparently showing up on a terrorist watch list or something like that.
And I think I told you this story last time, but there was a guy in high school who, like, when this movie came out, he like proclaimed like to everyone at school, like, oh, I'm gonna do this for like a month or so. Stupid to like come out and say that you're gonna say yes to everything, and that's what he meant too. Like he was going to do it Jim Carrey style and say yes to everything, even if it sounds like a bad idea. Immediately got taken advantage of by everybody. Like, oh, can you buy me a Coke? Can you buy but again, he didn't really. It was almost like childish the way it's. Well, like,
it's almost like he missed the
movie did.
But it's also he missed. It's like kind of like with 500 Days of Summer. He missed the point of the movie. The point of the movie is not to just say yes to everything.
He was like 16, 17-year-old boy, so of course he's not going to think it through. It's just funny. I always think of that with this movie. Not the movie's fault, it's just funny when people don't say. Anyway, but yeah, no, this movie has a lot of heart. That's what's probably its greatest strength. For comedy, it's like hit or miss with me. Again, I feel like the writing is solid and it's all situation based. Like a lot of the funniness comes from like the sort of predicaments he gets in with him having to say all this stuff. One thing like I almost forgot about that did kind of bother me watching this is I forgot how much product placement there was in it.
Yes. Not only did we have the famous Red Bull scene, but when I was rewatching it, I'm like, oh, this is an advertisement for Tempur-Pedic, too.
So, Mr. Carey, what we need is for you to say Red Bull as many times as you can in a span of 30 seconds. If you can get it to 100, we'll give you $1 million raise.
And if you can also just also prove the fact that that your partner won't feel movement on the bed if you have a Tempur-Pedic. That'd be great also. Thanks.
Oh God, yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah, and some of it made some sense. Like this was a Warner Brothers film, so of course they're gonna plug Harry Potter, and that that doesn't bother me that much. It was just weird. Like I until we had watched this for the show, I forgot how much, and I think part of it had to do with funding the movie, especially if you're gonna have like a big actor like Jim Carrey. I think they had to, fill out the budget a little bit. So I understand it. It's just the sort of thing that doesn't age well. Like in another, like it's been 10 years since the movie came out. In another 10 years, I feel like it might come off as a little more dated than it already is.
Well, and like, well, it's interesting because this is actually the second time I've watched a scripted program that had Red Bull as product placement. The other one, notable example I can think of is Legally Blonde the musical, not the stage play, but
oh God, yeah, you told me about this.
Yeah,
stage play.
The stage play. So when they did. It does not look like it was in the actual play. It looks like it was funding or sponsorship for this recording that showed on MTV. Because in the middle of the pre-intermission song, he's like, he walks into her bedroom and she has like a whole shelf of Red Bull. And he's like, so you like Red Bull? And she just yells, it gives me energy. And then later in the same song, he's like, he's like drinking the male lead's drinking Red Bull. He's like, and I'm loving it. But like, I'm like 98% because that's during a song, but it does not show up on the soundtrack. So I'm like 98% sure that fortunately that was just for that one performance, with it being sponsored by MTV and everything. But I'm like, apparently Red Bull. I hope Red Bull does that a lot, apparently.
Yeah, otherwise that'd be like straight up Orwellian. Like, geez, like even the theater isn't safe.
Well, speaking of,
we proudly served Twizzlers in the lobby.
So we talked about how this relates to kind of how it compares to 500 Days of Summer. The other thing I wanted to really compare about this is the friends in this movie versus the friends in the other movie. And like I said, my big shock with this movie was when I saw this, I was expecting it to be very bro-y sort of hangover-y sort of comedy, and it wasn't. It had more heart than that. And especially when you compare the friends in the indie emotional in touch with your movie in 500 Days of Summer and how problematic and creepy they were, and compared to these friends, and in these friends this movie, they're not great because they still kind of take advantage of him, but they're not like creepy, you know what I mean? So
yeah, well, and also the taking advantage, like Bradley Cooper does it, but he's mostly just trying to like get him to quit it, because he knows it's a bad idea to like just say yes to everything, so it's more for his own good. Like, hey, I appreciate you're trying to change your lifestyle, but this is stupid and crazy and you need to stop, so I'm going to keep making you do things you don't want to do until you stop. So it's much more of like a friendly sort of messing with him, other than like, trying to make Tom genuinely uncomfortable in front of Summer or whatever, or like saying like, oh dude, did you bang her yet?
Yeah. And then I think the other guy's name, I think his name was Rooney, I think was the other friend. He was just straight up taking advantage just because he could, but he wasn't like, he was doing that and that was like wrong, but he wasn't like, he didn't make me uncomfortable, like some of the other friends in 500 Days of Summer did.
For sure. And I do think some of that like comes with the oversight of having, studio backing. Because you're going to have like focus groups and stuff watch the movie beforehand. So you're not going to, and that's the thing too. This was like very much trying to make a profit, big stars and everything. Marketing it as like a return to form for Jim Carrey. So like they were trying very hard to hit all of the, and yeah, you're not wrong. I just think it's very calculated, and it's a good script. Honestly,
it was a good script,
very solidly written. Like this is another one of those where it's like if you're learning how to write a screenplay, this is one to if it's one of your favorite movies, watch it like 100 times because you'll learn how to write a good comedy.
Yeah, like it was, it would just make us laugh. Overall, it's good. So, so I guess now we're getting to the point to recommend, not recommend. Where are you standing?
Well, so I did talk about this last time we recorded, and I'm glad we kind of saved it for the end. It's probably a better idea, but I will say one thing. in the times we're living in and stuff, one thing and again, this is outside of the movie, this has nothing to do with recommend or anything, but one thing with Jim Carrey lately, he's been kind of heralded as like very like heroic figure fighting with people on Twitter, being like very political and stuff. And it is very funny to watch him fight with Mussolini's granddaughter. Or,
Wait, are you serious?
Anti-Trump stuff or whatever. But one thing that just irks me, and I feel like no one talks about nearly as much, is that he's, as far as I know, still an anti-vaxxer. In the early 2000s, him and his wife Jenny McCarthy were doing the whole vaccines cause autism thing. And, that was a while ago, and they are divorced now, but he has never really, like, come out and said that that's not the case. And kind of with how things are with the pandemic and everything, I think it would be nice if he, had something to say. And the fact that he doesn't say anything kind of makes me think he still believes that vaccines cause autism, and that somehow autism is like something to be avoided to the point where you'd rather catch COVID-19, which I think is a pretty toxic thing. So, again, has nothing to do with the movie, but just with everything going on, like, I figured it's, like, worth mentioning that it's something I personally don't really agree with. And it hurts my feelings a little bit, because, again, I was a huge fan of as an actor, I still am a huge fan of the guy. And as far as, like, with your view on it being, like, thinking this was going to be like a bro comedy, I really do recommend you check out his like early work, because I think you'd like a lot of Jim Carrey's movies, because most of them do have heart to them. Again, Liar Liar, the point of the movie is not to lie to people, Dumb and Dumber is a really great movie. It's like a buddy comedy, and
not the second one,
very
though.
like no, not the second one. Holy crap. Like, let us know if you want us to review that. That is like a whole basket of bad ideas. And then The Mask is a really like interesting idea of like a superhero movie. Have you seen The Truman Show?
I have not seen. I know the premise, but I have not seen it yet.
Check out his old movies, like from the 90s. I think you'd like a lot of them. Cable Guy is another one that I watched a few years ago. I never grew up with it, but that one's a pretty interesting, like, sort of, it's like a comedy mixed with a psychological thriller, where Jim Carrey's playing like a very, very needy friend.
Well, I just remember seeing the cover of that one in like DVD bins and on DVD shelves, and I remember just the cover artwork as a young child freaked me out, because he looks evil on the DVD box.
You'll see why if you see the movie. It's not a scary movie, but it is, again, it's like if you took a psychological like thriller and mixed it with a comedy, that's what it is. It's basically like he befriends the cable guy, and the cable guy's kind of unhinged.
Oh, okay.
Not in a violent, scary, well, but that's like and that's
don't give the game away.
But it's and the other one, I actually had the same. It didn't scare me, but I remember being intrigued by the cover of that one. The other one was Dumb and Dumber. When I was too young to see the movie, I had remembered like being like, "Whoa, this cover's like goofy looking." And then when I was old enough to see it, it was like my favorite thing for a while. But I do think you should watch some, and maybe we should review some of his old movies. I'm kind of thinking of like what we might be looking at next year. And I might put one of his on there. But I do encourage you, if you liked this, watch some of his other movies. Like Bruce Almighty's one that you've seen. That's kind of another, like, in the same arena as this movie. But I do, highly recommend his old stuff. And even, like, his dramatic work. The guy's a talented actor. I wish
no doubt.
Disagreed. I wish I didn't disagree with a lot of things he thinks is, like, a normal person, or just other weird stuff he's done, like being creepy to Emma Stone on YouTube in 2010. But like, the guy is talented, like, and he's probably, like, if he's in a movie, he's gonna do a good job. And as much as I'm digging into him, it's like it, doesn't reflect poorly on this movie particularly. I will say another notable actor, the guy who plays like the not cult leader, but like the guy who created the whole Yes Man movement.
Terrence.
He's like
something. Hold on, I have it.
Yeah,
here.
He's a great dramatic actor. He was in Billy Budd. He's been in Star Wars. Like he's really cool.
Terrence Stamp. That's his name. Terrence Stamp. Who plays Terrence somebody else in this one?
Yeah, I love how they didn't even change his first name. They're just like, yeah, we'll just call you Terrence.
So, we're at the time of the episode. Recommend, not recommend.
So for me, hasn't changed since the last time we recorded. I don't think this is a bad movie. Honestly,
Mhm.
like with 500 Days of Summer and this, they're kind of like the same where they're not the best, but they're not the worst.
Mhm.
For me, again, I feel like if you just like comedies, or you need something like kind of positive to watch, then sure. But if you're looking for like Jim Carrey at his best, this is not it. It's not his fault, but this movie just doesn't play to his strengths. And a lot of the jokes, there are a lot of funny jokes, but there's also a lot of like doing anything for a laugh kind of jokes, like the infamous Red Bull scene,
Mhm.
or other things like that. But so it's not bad, but I would say that if you're looking for the best, you could go elsewhere. So for this one, it's my first pass, I think, for the entirety of the show.
I think you're actually right. I think it is your first pass.
So pass for me, but like light pass. I don't think this is a bad movie by any stretch. I actually think the script is really strong, but I just don't think it is super, like, again, it doesn't play to Jim Carrey's strengths, and for that I feel like it suffers because they could have gotten someone who's better at situational comedy who
Right.
might have made the movie a little funnier. Uh,
So
but
I'm gonna say I'm gonna be just on the other side of the needle from you. Like you said, you're a light pass. I'm a light recommend. I've come down a little bit since I last. Cause I think I was a strong recommend last time. But with rewatching it, I was just very. I was like, okay. Like you said, there's not. It's weird. It's like there's nothing wrong. I mean, well, there were some few things that we just talked about, but there's nothing like that's totally that would make me just go pass based on this. But there's nothing that's really like yeah recommend either about it. It's kind of like it's a movie that has been done better in other forms. Like you said, it doesn't play to Jim Carrey's strengths, but it's still kind of cute and it still has kind of a good script. But I like to see the glass is half full. So
yeah,
that's my
no,
take on
and
it.
it's and it makes sense too. This is like a very, I know, very like emotionally uplifting movies are something that plays very well to your liking. So I'm
Yeah.
not surprised. Um, and again, I don't think this. I actually do think it's a pretty uplifting movie. Great way to kick off the summer.
Yeah. Very light.
It is. It is a much more like straightforward romantic comedy. I almost like, it almost just feels like a comedy. Like it technically is because it's like the whole getting the girl at the end, but it doesn't feel like it's trying to be like a quote unquote romantic comedy. Um, but it's good, and sadly, it was not the return to form that Jim Carrey was hoping, because after this, he signed on to a bunch of projects that did not do well and apparently weren't very good. Burt Wonderstone was one. He was in that, I think it's Mr. Poplar's Penguins,
Yeah, I remember that.
which I know I've met some people who were kids when that movie came out, and they're like, "Oh, I love that one." Apparently, didn't love it hard enough because it bombed.
I think it's one of those
And apparently,
movies.
it wasn't good. I didn't see it.
I think
But,
it's one of those movies that because it bombed, it was able to be picked up cheap for reruns on like Nickelodeon or Disney or something,
Yeah.
and a lot of people saw it and developed a following of it that way.
There are tons. I'm guilty of this myself. When you see things as a kid, even if it's terrible, you just develop like a nostalgic, emotional connection to it, and you love it. And when you're like grown up, you're just like, "Oh wow, I liked this. Yikes!" you know? So I haven't seen it. I can't speak on it. I just know people were like making fun of it at the time, and he's kind of taking a break. I can't think of the last thing he was in really. Like I know he's busy Twitter fighting. He does like painting in his free time, which I think his painting looks pretty good.
Oh, okay.
There's like a Vimeo video of him doing it. He does it for like his own like mental health.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
He's doing let's just say he's practicing self-care right now.
You know what else he is that I'm very interested to know? If we got to interview him, this would be like the first question I asked him. But so he, in his like early 20s, he was a huge metalhead, which is like my favorite genre of music. You haven't seen Ace Ventura, but there's like a cameo from a metal band called Cannibal Corpse in the movie, and that was him. Like he wanted them in the movie. And there's even interviews with the band where they're like, yeah, he was like a fan. Like he came up to us, like we walked out of the trailer and he walks up to us and he's like, "Oh, what's up, guys?
What's up?
Are you going to be playing Hammer Smash Face?" Or, and it's like,
It's just me,
wonder if
a fellow metalhead.
I just wonder if he still listens to it, because he's very like hippy dippy peace and everything nowadays. So I'm like, I wonder, that part of the reason I've heard him talk about it, and it's because he used to work as a janitor when he was doing stand-up comedy, and he was like very angry, so he was like listening to angry music. So probably doesn't listen to it anymore, but I don't know. It'd be cool if he did.
He probably could, just your preferred genre doesn't necessarily dictate your worldview. You can be doom and gloom on your music, but be peace, love, and happiness for all. And
for sure, that's how I am. But you never know. Maybe it was too.
It's too dark now.
Maybe he associates it with a dark time or something, but I don't know. Again, I'm curious if he still listens to it. While we were talking about that, I did mention this last time we recorded, and I did want to touch on it again because I think it's a cool little note on his acting. But so he did a thing that Hannibal Lecter, Anthony Hopkins did in Silence of the Lambs. So we've all heard of method acting, where you pretend you're the character even outside, of the movie, which is not always a good idea. And then there's a style of acting that I actually think is kind of neat, where you just play the character as yourself, but as the character, so a little bit more laid back. But what Anthony Hopkins did for Hannibal Lecter is he did I don't know what it's called, but you basically try and personify an animal. Mm-hmm. And so for Silence of the Lambs, he tried to sort of channel a tarantula and a lizard.
I can see the lizard with the eyes, yeah.
So for Ace Ventura, Jim Carrey, he actually talked to Anthony Hopkins about that. And so what he did for that movie is he did the same thing, but he was channeling a tropical bird, like a parrot or a cockatoo.
I can see that.
And that's why he's wearing those Hawaiian shirts and his hair is done that way, is because he was like, oh, this character is very showy, kind of like these birds, that he's very loud and he's very flamboyant.
Yeah.
So I'm going
that makes
and
sense.
Even the way he walks and stuff is very it kind of reminds you of that. It's one of those facts when you hear it, you can't unsee it when you watch the movie. And I don't know how many more actors have used that style, but it's interesting. And I do think, at least in both of those cases, I think it turned out a good product. So, but that's just, I don't know. Some people have heard of that, but if you haven't, I just always found that interesting about that character in that movie.
All right. No, sorry.
On
that note, just because I'm looking at our time clock here. So we're glad you guys could join us for what turned out to unintentionally be Zooey Deschanel month.
And we should do it next year.
Zooey Deschanel, the many roles of Zooey Deschanel. Let's do it. Or
just pick a different actress, and a different random month.
Exactly. Just do it. Kate Blanchett month.
Oh man, hell yeah, that would be awesome.
But we're glad y'all tuned in to listen to us again this month. We'll see you next month again for us. We're doing our second annual Blockbuster month for July, so we'll be excited to have you guys here. Don't forget to subscribe, click the notification bell if you're on YouTube, and I don't know how it works in the other podcasting forms, but you can follow us. Please follow us. We love having new listeners, and we love kind of just talking about what we know very little about.
Stop shilling. Just kidding.
But we will...
Well, thanks for hanging with us, guys.
And we will catch y'all
and until next time. Yeah, until next time, stay thirsty.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Ace Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.